totally
So
read
I hope
every
we've driven the point of how important nitric oxide
Well,
is.
I think we're missing a very important question. I think a
Performance.
lot of people are interested in this one, using nitric oxide for athletic performance,
Yeah.
for working out, and overall
Yeah, fitness.
fitness.
Well, you know, there's a huge market in the pre-workout, or a lot of products for pre-workout. So the science tells us, and this is 20 years old, your ability to produce nitric oxide predicts your exercise capacity. So
Say it again. Say that one more time.
your ability to produce nitric oxide predicts your exercise capacity.
Correct.
So in athletes that can make sufficient nitric oxide, good endothelial function, all systems are primed, they're the best of the best, right? They outcompete their competition because they're getting sufficient blood flow to supply that working skeletal muscle, whatever it is. With oxygen nutrients, we're enhancing mitochondrial function. So nitric oxide improves mitochondrial biogenesis, and it improves the efficiency of oxygen utilization to make ATP, the cellular energy. So what does that mean in terms of performance? You can go longer, stronger, faster, and outcompete your competition.
We have to bring up our personal story. I mean, and
you get less
I wanna
lactic acid
back up-
buildup.
I want to back up what you're saying with some anecdotal, like personal experience. So Mike and I went to Silverton, Colorado, we're alpinists and we do backcountry skiing and extreme skiing. We hadn't been in a couple of years, and we went from sea level. We live in Miami, and we went all the way to 13,000 feet. You know, jumping out of a helicopter,
Carrying 30-pound bags with boards.
50-pound bags, boards, and you know, it was funny because when we got there, the guys were like, you know, we're nicely tanned, you know, and they're like, you guys are from where? Miami. And you could tell that they were like, we're probably gonna have to rescue these guys off the mountain. And you know, we crushed it, man. I mean, we were right there with the locals. We were hours and hours of climbing and going down, and you know, we talked to each other. I'm like, man, this nitric oxide, it has to be working, because like my endurance is something that I never thought I could have. I'm 42, and I was climbing up mountains with kids. Giving them a run for their money.
Part of the body's acclimization to high altitude is an improvement in nitric oxide production. You know, we published on this in 2007 in Tibet. Tibetans live at 12,000 feet above sea level, but yet they've adapted to living in a low oxygen environment by improving their nitric oxide production. So when we go to altitude, it usually takes at least 48 hours for our body to adapt and upregulate nitric oxide production. That's people that are in good health, have good endothelial function. So if you take, you know, your 50-year-old diabetic, overweight person with ED, you send them to altitude, they're going to do very poorly. Because they can't acclimate. So what our products do is we provide if your body can't make nitric oxide, we do it for you. So we acclimated you by taking that product, so you didn't need 48 hours to allow your body to acclimate to that low oxygen environment. So
that's why we acclimated so fast.
So what would be some food sources that can complement your nitric oxide, right? Because some people, I don't want to talk about brands, but the one that we were using, we had to give them double the dose to see a sustained nitric oxide level throughout the day. And it gets expensive, right? Because it's not the only molecule we use. We use omega, and we use a lot of different things, right? The point is, how could we supplement and complement our nitric oxide supplementation so we can reduce a little bit of cost on the supplementation side and get natural? What type of foods, which are the foods with the most potent amount of nitric oxide?
Let's take a step back and figure out what goes wrong in people that can't make nitric oxide. So I think that's the fundamental question we have to answer. Because if we can eliminate kind of the hurdles that people are trying to overcome to make nitric oxide, then their body can naturally make it. So I tell people all the time, to make nitric oxide, you have to do two things. You have to stop doing the things that disrupt nitric oxide production, and then start doing the things that have been shown to clinically promote it.
Let's talk about the things that disrupt.
I think that's a very important point.
Super interesting.
Because people, for the most part, humans have good intent, right? We try to do all the right things. We try to eat right, exercise. But, you know, mouthwash, we found, and we published on this, you know, maybe 15 years ago.
Listerine kills how much bacteria?
Yeah, now listen, all of, and they advertise this.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's a
selling point.
That's a slogan.
Yeah, the worst thing you can do is disrupt the microbiome. You know, the microbiome field has exploded over the past 20 years. So we don't take an antibiotic every day for the rest of our life. Why? Because it disrupts the flora, and there are known systemic effects of that. So why would people use an antiseptic mouth rinse and to kill the oral microbiome? You know, now we're finding, we published on this, I was on the doctor's show a couple of years ago, 2 out of 3 Americans use mouthwash. 2 out of 3 Americans have an unsafe elevation in blood pressure. That's not coincidental. The other thing is if you use mouthwash, you lose the protective benefits of exercise. So think about this in this world we live in.
You
These
lose
guys
the
come to-
protective benefits of exercise?
Exercise.
Oh, wow.
So you lose the blood pressure lowering effects of exercise, which is the adaptive effect, the so-called hormesis of how you adapt to exercise.
So it can actually be detrimental to
detrimental.
exercise
Yeah.
by
No, that's
taking
right.
this
That's right.
product.
So
Wow.
people come to you, they get optimized, and we're trained. You see it on the commercials. Good breath, good oral hygiene.
The pretty
Gets the
boys.
girl.
Pretty boys. Yeah. You use mouthwash twice a day. You're killing the bacteria. We published several years ago. 7 days of mouthwash use can increase your blood pressure by 25 millimeters of mercury.
Wow.
So now you're making a patient clinically hypertensive just by eradicating the oral microbiome, which is now essential for maintaining nitric oxide production.
No, and the worst part is most of them, a lot of them, are taking antacids because they don't make enough.
Well, that's the next
digestive
step
enzyme,
in
and
the
it's another
process.
culprit.
So when we try to understand how nitric oxide is made, there are multiple steps in this process. So number one, we're not getting enough nitrate from our diet. Number two, 2 out of 3 Americans are using mouthwash. And there's other populations that have oral infections or dysbiosis, gingivitis, periodontal disease that shuts down, again, disrupts the microbiome.
Yeah.
And then the final process in that is stomach acid. 200 million prescriptions written a year in the U.S. alone for proton pump inhibitors, PPIs. That's not even counting the over-the-counter purchases. You got Prilosec, Prevacid, Larry the Cable Guy out there telling you to take your Prilosec OTC every day. If you want to look like him and die of heart disease, yeah, you probably should take it every day.
Wow.
I believe that another important one that I forgot that I read, consuming simple carbohydrates inhibits the nitric oxide enzyme, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah, so just like when
So-
you measure kind of your sugar status by measuring hemoglobin A1C, that's a glycated, that's sugar
Right.
stuck to hemoglobin. Well, nitric oxide synthase is an enzyme. When you get sugar stuck to it, it disrupts the flow of electron, glycates it, shuts down its function.
So eating carbs shuts down your nitric oxide production?
That's right.
I just heard you say something really interesting because this is personal for me. So, and maybe it's connected. So, what are the effects on nitric oxide supplementation with periodontal disease?
Well, I was here last week speaking at a dental conference. The dental community is starting to recognize the importance of nitric oxide. What's called the oral systemic link has been known for probably 40 years. So people with poor oral hygiene, gingivitis, periodontal disease have a higher incidence of heart attack and stroke. What's the connection? What's the mechanism for the oral systemic link? People thought it was the inflammation in the gingival tissue that was leading to systemic inflammation. What we've discovered is that it's nitric oxide. Wow. So if you have gingivitis, periodontal disease, oral dysbiosis, shuts down nitric oxide production, leads to an increase in blood pressure, leads to increased vascular inflammation, platelets become hyperactive, increased incidence of heart attack and stroke. That is the mechanism for oral
Well, I'll tell
systemic
you
link.
something super interesting then, because we had Dr. David Benkoff who, he helped me with my periodontal disease. He actually told me I had to remove 2 teeth. And the viewers know, I told the story last time. But the interesting thing about this, and this is why I'm bringing it up, is because I stopped using, when I read your book, I stopped using Listerine. I started supplementing with nitric oxide. I went back to my dentist and they measured, to gauge how much it's progressing. They have to measure the pockets on your in your gums.
Yeah.
And I had improved by 50%. I actually reversed periodontal disease by doing the right things and removing the toxicity. Incredible that you brought that up.
Look at that.
Yeah.
So, keep your bad breath. Keep your nitric oxide.
No, that's not true. Don't say that.
Take chewing gum.
Yeah,
That's
chewing
another
gum.
way.
I don't have bad breath. I tell my wife all the time, if I have bad breath, let me know. And we stop
Floss.
using
Stop
mouthwash.
using-
Yes,
yes.
floss.
Floss.
I think that's the
Floss.
biggest thing. People
Completely.
don't floss. You got to floss, but you
Floss.
don't need mouthwash to
Mouthwash.
keep a healthy
Yeah.
mouth.
And
right?
again, to understand the physiology of it, why we're saying not to use mouthwash. We're not just saying things. And it's really important that now we're seeing cardiovascular disease is the #1 killer in America. And we've found now 2 sources all dependent on nitric oxide.
Yeah.
We know that erectile dysfunction, whenever it's everywhere, they say if you have erectile dysfunction, it may be the sign of endothelial dysfunction.
No, for sure.
What is endothelial dysfunction? Nitric oxide
deficiency.
deficiency. Now, if you have mouth problems, the oral cardiovascular link and oral, like you just said it, also increases risk of cardiovascular disease. What is the link? Nitric oxide. So this is really, you're making the thread here, how important that molecule is. Again, we're not trying to sell. We're trying to educate on physiology I think two more points that we want to do. First, we started as a testosterone replacement company. Yeah. We use a lot of testosterone because we're seeing patients with a lot of dysfunction, endocrine dysfunction. Yeah. Explain to me the synergy between testosterone and nitric oxide.
Well, it's known that both testosterone and estrogen stimulate and activate nitric oxide synthase, the lining of the blood vessels to make nitric oxide. But if that enzyme is uncoupled and dysfunctional, then you no longer get the activation of that enzyme. So if you use hormone replacement therapy without fixing the nitric oxide synthase problem, then you're only getting half the benefits of of testosterone. Because one of the benefits of proper hormone is cardioprotection. The cardioprotective benefits of testosterone and estrogen are dependent upon the ability to make nitric oxide. Wow. So if you don't fix endothelial dysfunction prior to giving the testosterone, you're only really addressing half the story. Wow. And then you got to ask, well, why are these patients deficient in hormones? Well, the endocrine glands sample the blood, right? So we have sufficient blood supply to the pituitary, the HPA axis, to the gonads, and then that tells us, well, we're low, we got to secrete. Right. Mm-hmm. If you have reduced blood flow to these endocrine glands that are sensing, then you're not getting a proper kind of pooling or a sample for the body. There are a number of things that disrupt testosterone production, whether it's lowering your cholesterol with statin medications, whether it's exposure to all these endocrine disruptors. But I think the most important thing is we have to balance and recreate homeostasis. But without doing this, without understanding the nitric oxide production pathway and restoring that, you're really doing your patients a disservice, because you're treating numbers, right? You're not treating the patient.
And you're not treating the physiology.
You're not treating the physiology.
If I may ask, this is actually kind of like a monkey wrench, and connecting back to high elevation and all these things. One of the things that we deal with is secondary erythrocytosis as a result of testosterone. Mm-hmm. So how do you see that nitric oxide playing a role there? Because some guys end up getting overphlebotomized. Yeah. So, and we know that's not good. So where do you see nitric oxide playing a role? Because, some guys get really concerned when they see their hematocrit and their hemoglobin go up. And we're very big on that. So where do you see nitric oxide play a role there?
Well, it's what allows for the expanded volume, right? So you have a finite amount of blood, right? And pumping through a finite amount of blood vessels. So if you have stiff, constricted blood vessels, then your blood pressure is going to go up, your blood's going to get sludgy, you're going to activate platelets and increase risk of heart attack and stroke. Right. If you restore the production of nitric oxide, now the blood vessels become kind of vasoactive, and they can expand and now allow for that increase in hematocrit or blood volume, improvement in oxygen delivery. I think it's still an important
component. So it makes it for safer traffic.
Yeah, you're basically converting it to, say, 2 lanes to 4 lanes. Right. So now you're getting, and you get less activation of platelets, and now the blood vessels can accommodate that increased volume. I think it's still important for you to measure that and monitor that. I think it's
always we do. And you talked about living in altitudes. Mm-hmm. What happened when somebody becomes the Tibetans that live in high altitudes?
Yeah, they increase their.
They have high erythrocytosis, so they have high hemoglobin hematocrit. Mm-hmm. But because they have higher level or better level of nitric oxide, they have a higher highway, so they can accommodate that higher level of blood.
And that's what some of the research they defend themselves with higher altitude. That makes sense now.
So it makes sense completely that nitric oxide really is at the basis of physiology of all of those different systems. Yeah. That's amazing. So now let's talk about, we talked about dietary ways of increasing nitric oxide. What is the best supplement? Again, this is where, we need to talk about your products because you came up with something amazing. I want to know for our viewers, should they just go and buy beetroots? Do they do celery juice? Or what should we take to increase our nitric oxide?
Well, consumers are confused. I've been in this field for 25 years. Sometimes I'm confused if I look at the advertising. So beets, 90% of the beets out there don't do anything in terms of, we call them dead beets, right? We use them as placebos in our clinical trials.
Wow.
So the only thing they do is turn your pee and your poop pink and cause a lot of anxiety. So, and again, going back to our food study is depending upon where these beets are grown, how they're harvested, the time of harvest, but most importantly, how that, what we call a high brix concentrate is dried down into a powder. Most companies use a very fast, high heat, high pressure. It destroys the nutrient density of that material. So beets typically don't work. And then they get the oxalate problems. People are susceptible to gout or kidney stones. So what we do is completely different, and this is based on a number of my discoveries from 20 years ago, is if your body can't make nitric oxide, then we got to do it for you. Similar to what you guys do. If your body can't make testosterone, what do? You give testosterone. Right? You're not giving precursors and hoping their body can convert it to nitric oxide, because that's their problem.
Exactly.
They've lost the ability to make testosterone endogenously. That same principle is what we call restorative physiology, is what we do with all our products. So if your body can't make nitric oxide, we do it for you. We do this in the form of a lozenge. You put the lozenge in your mouth. It takes about 5 minutes to completely dissolve, but as that matrix is falling apart, we're generating nitric oxide gas. We can quantify it, we can detect it, we can verify it with a nitric oxide analyzer. We've got a beet powder that we ferment, so we optimize the nitric oxide production. We've taken out the beet pulp, the oxalates. Beets are a peasant vegetable, right? Going back thousands of years. And beets are also the third least liked food on the planet. So what we do is we've taken the beauty and the nitric oxide potential of beets, ferment it, take out the oxalates, the beet pulp, the beet taste, the beet color. We add electrolytes because most people are dehydrated at the cellular level. And then we add mitochondrial ATP for energy production.
Right.
So anything we do, whether it's our beet powder, our lozenge, or now our topicals, we generate nitric oxide. So we're not relying on your body to do it. If your body can't do it, we do it for you. But most importantly, we fix the reason your body can't make nitric oxide. We recouple the nitric oxide synthase in the lining of the blood vessels, so you see an improvement in endothelial function. And now we've got some really cool data coming with our dental colleagues that we can restore the oral microbiome so that you can diversify this microbiome by giving these bugs a source of nitrogen in the form of nitrate or nitrite. And now we're repopulating these bugs. So we're restoring the oral dysbiosis, we're restoring endothelial dysfunction, and we're giving your body a source of nitric oxide.
So just to be clear, because there's a couple products in there, the lozenges are more the medicinal daily way of sustaining nitric oxide, and then the powder form, which again, you say beets don't work, but you explained us before that the beets that you carry here or something get activated automatically.
That's right.
And it's actually the best way to take your supplements because you get that nitric oxide endothelial function, so anything you're intaking, you're absorbing it much.
Yeah, so the lozenge is kind of like your once or twice daily, kind of daily nitric oxide dose, similar to a vitamin C or vitamin D or an omega.
Right.
That's your make sure that your body's getting its source of nitric oxide. The beets we positioned as kind of, because there's a lot of products out there, a lot of noise on beets exercise performance. What we do is we optimize that. So we pre-convert our beets so that we're not dependent upon the bacteria, because if that's the case, everybody would have a differential response. So we get the same response in every single person that takes this. This we brought to market really to replace things like 5 Hour Energy, Monster, Red Bull, these really dangerous stimulant-ridden drinks that most people are taking. Why not take a natural energy source, improve nitric oxide, improve blood flow, improve mitochondrial function without the crash, without all the stimulants?
So that's a real precursor, pre-workout right there.
Yeah,
it's a pre-workout. This here is an amazing product in terms of improving performance, whether it's athletic performance, sexual performance, or cognitive performance.
Optimizing your health is only a scan away. Select the QR code that fits your profile best, and we look forward to hearing from you at the Medical Health Institute.